Hello again, fellow Irish learners. Are you curious or confused about how the gender of nouns works in Irish? If you've studied languages other than English before, you've probably come across this issue, which isn't the same for English speakers as it is in many other languages. It's never as simple as we think. English has used ideas of gender, for instance, in pronouns, so we differentiate between he and she, where some languages don't do that. He, she, and it, in fact. Though recently we've seen a lot of change in that area, socially and actually in language usage. And there are still things that exist from older times, such as people referring to vehicles or vessels, ships or cars as she. Otto Jespersen, a Danish linguist, described as a foremost authority on English grammar, argues he or she may be used in order to show a certain kind of sympathy with or affection for the thing. The problem is, of course, that it's archaic or out of date to speak this way. Kind of not formal language, it's not used seriously, but you still hear it sometimes. But that isn't what's meant by grammatical gender. So today we're going to consider how grammatical gender works in Irish, what it does to nouns. It's something that has an effect through everything you read and speak and write in Irish. Apparently Old English had grammatical gender, but we don't now, so that, I suppose, is something to be thankful for. However, Irish still does. That shouldn't put anyone off any more than it does when you learn any other language. It'll be familiar to you if you've ever done French or German, which of course has three. The der, die, das, the masculine, feminine, neuter. But the logic of grammatical gender is that it's not connected to whether something is necessarily male or female. It may coincide with that, but it's not what we mean by gender in common parlance. It's about classing nouns in a particular way, how they behave when you use the language, and how they make other words behave. And we'll see how that works with Irish today. So those classes of nouns get called masculine, feminine, and in some languages neuter, but it doesn't have anything to do with men, women, or anything on that spectrum necessarily. It may coincide, but it doesn't mean that. An example would be from Irish, an Colleen. A girl is actually a masculine noun, an Colleen. We'll see why we can tell that a little bit further on. So if you find any of this confusing, just hold on and we'll work through the different rules, and I promise you that you'll come out the other end with a clearer idea of what's going on with the gender of nouns in Irish. Fortunately, Irish, like French, only has the two, masculine and feminine. Apparently Old Irish had three, with a neuter as well, but we won't worry about that since it's no longer the case. But where you could learn French ones by simply memorising the noun either through its definite article, le or la, though that could be confusing, or through un or une, the indefinite article, well, Irish doesn't have an indefinite article. You can't say a cat or a dog, you just leave off the a. It does, however, have a word for the. But in the case of Irish, the word an, which in the singular means the, an, is not the actual word that changes according to gender. It's a word that changes the noun that follows. From other languages, we may be used to the idea that the noun changes perhaps at the end. That indicates whether it's masculine or feminine. But in Irish, that noun is going to change or not at the beginning of the word. Although the word an itself won't change, if it's followed by a feminine noun that begins with a consonant, or most consonants, that will actually make that noun soften at the beginning. So if you take a word like brogue, a shoe, you can hear how similar it is to the English word brogue, which is a specific kind of shoe. Brogue becomes an bhróg. So the B becomes a BH. It's softened or lenited. That's a way we can recognise that it's a feminine noun, at least if it's in this particular case. It gets more complicated, but let's just go with that for the time being. If you see that the consonant following an is softened with an H, so B becomes BH, and many other letters do this too, then that's a sign that it's a feminine noun. And conversely, when you're speaking, if you know the word is brogue and it's feminine, you say an bhróg, not an brogue. I shouldn't actually repeat the wrong one so it doesn't stay in people's minds. Of course, you might not recognise that it was the same word if you didn't know this rule. Why does it matter? Well, it's going to affect everything else you do with the word in a sentence. That sounds more complicated than it is. If the feminine noun began with a vowel, an wouldn't make this change to the noun. So, the place, a night, the place. It doesn't get a change because it begins with a vowel. And that's one of the other ways we can tell it apart in this case from a masculine noun. Just to further thicken the plot or complicate matters, though we mustn't worry too much at this stage, as it's explained in this book, Teach Yourself Irish, there's another situation, which is that if a feminine noun begins with an S in front of L, N, R or a vowel, it becomes TS and is pronounced as a T, such as throit becomes antroit. Now, you'll have to pardon my pronunciation, but the idea is that it looks like a TSRAID, but you just pronounce it as a T. That's what happens if that feminine noun begins with an S in front of L, N, R or a vowel. Is this too much? If a masculine noun begins with a vowel, like aron, or bread, aron, it gets a T in front with a hyphen. An, taron. That's how you know it is a masculine noun in that case. Well, it could make your head spin, especially once you realise that not all consonants undergo lenition. Still, nonetheless, it's a good sign if the noun after the or an actually does, that it's a feminine noun, in the nominative case at least. For me, the word really needs more context to help me memorise how it sounds and how it's going to change or not. How the word behaves in different sentences is going to depend, as I said, on whether it's masculine or feminine. There's also the fact that you want to be able to use the pronoun to refer to it. So if somebody says to you, "Where is the shoe?" you want to be able to answer, "It is on the table," and in Irish that will be "she is on the table." So, "Cá bhfuileann bhróg," where is the shoe? You'd have to say, "Tá sí ar an mbord," she is on the table. Tá sí salach, she's dirty. Anyway, I don't think the shoe would be on the table, but you get the idea. You need to be able to say she, and if you don't know whether it's masculine or feminine, if you haven't learned that when you learned the noun, it's going to be hard to make a sentence like that. You might just have to say "on the table" and hope for the best. According to Michael O'Sheil in Learning Irish, there are some generalizations that it can help us recognize whether a noun is likely to be masculine or feminine. He says Irish nouns describing males, human and animal, are all masculine, as it luckily happens to be. And those for females are mostly, but not all, feminine. I'm looking at you, Colleen, and probably others. Another generalization, nouns ending in broad consonants, so the ones associated with the vowels A, O and U, tend to be masculine. Those ending in slender, that's E and I, so the consonants associated with E and I next to them, tend to be feminine. Note that "tend to be" would mean that they're not all necessarily so. He doesn't expand on that at this point in the book. It's useful to have this kind of generalization to help you spot which ones are likely to be the case. A lot of the time when you speak, you do have to wing it. So it's useful to have little clues or cues that help you. The Collins Irish Grammar, which I have reviewed elsewhere, discusses masculine nouns as being in 3 groups. The ones that end in a broad consonant, which we just heard about, the ones that refer to a particular profession and end in various endings that are the equivalent of like baker or teacher or waiter in English, but in Irish they are éis, your and oir. And the ones that end in in, like Colleen, the diminutive. O'Sheil breaks this down with further examples. For feminine, we have those ending in a slender consonant, those ending in og or yog, those ending in Lan, Lann, and referring to a place. The example they give in the Collins is Picturelan, the cinema. Now, I've talked about this coming up in sentences where you want to say it is something and you'll have to choose he or she in Irish. But it will also become an issue when you use an adjective after a noun. Where a French adjective after a noun could change its ending to indicate gender, an Irish one will change, again, the beginning of the noun. So, for instance, Buchel ma, good boy. Buchel ma, masculine. So we have the adjective ma, good, because adjectives come after the noun in Irish. Obish wa, good work. It becomes wa, it leneates. The M becomes an MH after the word obish, which means work, because that's a feminine noun. So it's the same adjective in each case, but it changes depending on whether the noun that precedes it is feminine or masculine. Actually, it's just one more good reason I recommend courses like Buntus Cancha, which use an audiolingual approach. You hear the sounds of things and you learn the patterns. The patterns are very carefully chosen so that you're being exposed to masculine and feminine nouns and lenition without yet learning what's going on with them, and they'll become familiar. Rather than just learning a word by itself with the article where you have no context, the idea is there that eventually you hear them correctly in your head and they'll just pop out the way they should, ideally. Bite-size Irish suggests always learning the gender of a noun when you learn the noun. I didn't do that, so it means I have to go back and really make sure I know, or I'll make a lot of blunders. Does that matter? Not always, if people can still understand you. But maybe memorize it with an adjective to make it stick, and just be aware that that may be different in different cases, like in the genitive, for instance. You may see lenition as well. So it's not simple, but we have some rules that help us grasp what's going on. Maybe you're someone who can just commit to memory whether something's masculine or feminine, but it's not always easy. I'll try and put the rules below, as I said. So to sum up, the grammatical gender of Irish nouns affects how they and their adjectives will behave in a sentence, as well as their pronouns, of course. That's not unique to Irish. There are some broad rules, not without exceptions. Exception is said to prove the rule. But ideally you want to learn the nouns with adjectives by repeated hearing within the context of sentences. Within the context of sentences. So using dialogues and so on from books like this, or any other sound files that you have access to that have this kind of patterning to teach without actually overtly explaining the grammar, and that can come after. And then understand the fine points later when the patterns have stuck in your head. But to reiterate, it's not the end of the world in any language if you get the gender wrong of a noun when you're speaking, as long as you can make yourself understood. Let me know in the comments if you have a way that you commit the gender of nouns to memory, or what you think on this topic across languages outside Irish or in your learning of Irish.